All right, so the trial is over. Donald Trump was acquitted. What kind of thoughts, Boyd, do you have on the trial? I mean, it was only 5 days long, incredibly short. I think the next shortest one was Donald Trump's last impeachment trial, which was 21 days, and then I think Bill Clinton's was 5 weeks. So it was quite short. It ended on Saturday. They had that last minute thing where we think we're going to call witnesses and people are freaking out. And then we're like, just kidding. We're not going to call witnesses. We're going to enter this statement from, was it a congressman? They decided to enter into the record a statement. But so we almost extended the trial for probably a month, but then at the last minute, they decided not to do that. But just generally, kind of what are your thoughts on the trial in the Senate?
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, I think both Republicans and Democrats are happy that it was a short trial. I think they wanted a short trial. I don't think anybody expected there to be any witnesses. Many of the folks who were impaneled as senators and jurors in the impeachment trial were witnesses to the day's events. And so, and it looked to me like most of what was submitted by the House managers was real video, just flat out video and compilations of timelines. So they didn't need to take a long time. A week, 5 days was probably about right. I think there's a strong desire by both parties to really kind of move beyond it and focus on the future. And so other than that little blip, which was a surprise, and I was trying to figure out what in the world just happened to cause them to want that, it proceeded along a pretty predictable path. The Senate was going to be on vacation already this week anyway for the President's Day holiday. They certainly didn't want to stick around past Saturday. And so you saw the result that you saw, which again was the result was predictable. The vote sort of, right up to the very end was a little bit in doubt, not whether they would acquit or convict, but just how many votes there would be from the Republican side for a conviction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, the House managers, I think their strategy was clearly all along, we're gonna focus on the events of what happened on January 6th. They because that's some really emotional, powerful, stuff. Like the videos they played were very powerful, and I'm sure that got it touched a lot of people, got them emotional, and that's probably where they wanted them to be. And then let's have a vote now. I mean, I think they wanted to work them up because clearly, I don't think the law was on their side as far as incitement. The technical legal definition of incitement, they didn't spend a lot of time on that. And I think the reason probably was because it's, I don't think they had that. I just don't think they met that test, with the imminent. He's got to be directing it to happen right now, and there has to be kind of some intention. I mean, it's kind of a fuzzy area because you're in an impeachment trial in the Senate, so probably whatever they can convince people to decide what incitement means, that will by definition end up being what it means because it's not going to be reviewed by anybody.
Yeah.
But I don't think they spent a lot of time on that. They spent a lot of time on what happened on January 6th, which is probably, if I was on the House manager team, like that's probably where you want to be because that's going to be the most powerful, moving presentation.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think this is where a lot of folks, and some lawyers included, those in our profession, get a little distracted by this because our natural inclination is to go to the law and talk about strict definitions and talk about elements of the offense. In a criminal trial, the judge would charge the jury. The lawyers would never be arguing to the jury what the legal definition of incitement was. They would prove up the elements, and then in closing arguments, they would lay out the facts that establish each of those elements. And there likely would be a motion at the end of the prosecution's case if the prosecution, or by the defense, if the prosecution had in fact not met those elements. And the court might issue a verbal ruling on that before the defense took up its case. This is a political exercise. It's quasi-legal, and so you see some of the arguments one way or the other saying, well, they didn't meet the legal definition of incitement. They didn't need to meet the legal definition of incitement. All they had to do was prove in the common term incitement did Donald Trump essentially cause what happened on January 6th. I did hear a couple of threads, though, that I thought was very interesting from the last time we spoke about incitement as a process. That over the course of many, many months, starting really even before the election, when President Trump was attacking vote by mail systems and absentee ballots and trying to make that very bizarre distinction between the difference between an absentee ballot and a vote by mail process, which just ended up confusing a whole lot of people, but that the election was going to be fraudulent. And he did the same in 2016, that it was going to be fraudulent. He even claimed afterwards it was a fraudulent election, even though he won, because he didn't like that he lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. And so they laid this out a little bit, that it was a process over many months that led to the actual events of January 6th. What I didn't understand, and I listened to, I think, the final two, maybe final three House managers Saturday morning while I was on a long drive. I was listening to them, and what I was waiting for, honestly, Wes, in terms of a legal type of argument, was the old but for argument. In other words, but for Donald Trump's speech up to and including January 6th, would the events of the Capitol have occurred? And I think that would have been a very strong and compelling argument for perhaps a few that were maybe sitting on the fence. I don't think there are a whole lot, because I think the answer to that clearly is no. But for President Trump and his words and his actions up to and including January 6th, all those events would not have happened. So there was a little bit of a causation element there that you would get in a criminal trial that you weren't going to get in a political trial. So, you know, as a lawyer watching it, you see where they cut corners legally, and you can see politically where they're trying to, you know, weasel in there a little bit. But overall, I thought the House managers, at least the portions that I did hear, I didn't tune in, you know, around the clock 24/7 to listen to all that, because we do have lives to lead. But I thought the final two or three House manager arguments on Saturday, particularly from Representative Joe Negusha of Colorado and Jamie Raskin, were very powerful and very convincing from a litigator's perspective.
Yeah. Like if you were on the defense team, looking at that, as I was watching that evidence be brought in, all the videos, it's clearly, I think this was so far away from being a legal trial. It was politics, because everything that was played seemed like it was extremely prejudicial. You know, the question was really, did they incite what happened? Yeah. And they didn't really spend any time on that. It was all about look at all the harm that happened. And I would think, well, as a defense, if you were defending, I'd say we stipulate to that. We don't want any of that coming in, because you should be looking at the words said and if that legally caused that. But anyway, there was a whole lot of, when it was edited in a way that I don't know who edited it, but it was, I'm sure in a courtroom that wouldn't have been allowed to be brought in the way it was without any kind of validation of anything. So I don't know.
It was repetitive. I mean, some of it was shown once, twice, even three times from what I understood and what I heard. And that kind of repetition is not allowed in the court. There's a quick objection by the defense, it would have been in this case, and a quick ruling by the judge saying, you've already introduced that. We're not going to have you listen to it again. Yeah.
And I don't know if Leahy, did he say anything about any of the evidence being talked about or shown at all? I mean, it's
no. Leahy is an interesting question all the way around, because he just sort of sat there and read to him what was put in front of him by I guess it was someone who was employed by the Senate to follow the rules and establish the right parliamentary procedure. I don't know what her name was, but and I do recall in the first impeachment of President Trump that there was also official statements that were being read in that Chief Justice John Roberts was reading. But this was like crazy. It was like Leahy was just watching, and then something would happen, and he would say, "What?" And then they would put a paper in front of him, and he'd read it, and then there'd be a point of order, up to and including the moment when the Senate voted, I think it was 55 to 45 on Saturday morning to accept witnesses. Some of the senators didn't even know what they were voting on. So it was so heavily scripted, and Leahy just kind of sat there. I will say I've not heard any mention by anyone, Republican, saying that Leahy was out of order or that he was one-sided. I haven't heard anything like that. I also haven't heard anything from the Democratic side saying that Patrick Leahy did the most amazing job ever. I really think he was, for lack of a better term, a potted plant who was just reading whatever the parliamentarian put in front of him. There was no real legal rulings to any of that, because the Senate rules governing the proceedings are frankly just boring and predictable.
Yeah.
I mean, even when Senator Mike Lee interjected, I can't remember what day it was, that there had been some statement that had been made that he claims he had not said something that they claimed that he had, and he tried to debate it. And I think anyone, if someone said, "Hey, Boyd said this," and I was like, "I didn't say that, and I didn't hear that," I would want that corrected in the record. But the rules apparently don't even allow for that. Then I understand they sort of turned off their microphones, which makes for really terrible TV and even worse radio. And then decided, we'll withdraw that one statement about Senator Lee because it's not material to the case. Well, geez, if they had removed everything that wasn't material to the case, this would have been a 2-day impeachment trial.
Yeah. I mean, yes, because I think if they would have really just focused on the article of impeachment, which was an incitement of insurrection, you would have been focusing on, okay, here were the words said right before that, and did it, let's look at if it was incitement. It seems like that, when they were arguing so much about what's happened over the last year, I mean, to me, that's clearly you basically just trying to redefine what incitement means, because it's you're going in the past year. That I mean, I think that's going way too far. But I also think they were trying. To me, it looked like they were trying really hard to invite the defense to talk about election fraud. Like, we want you to talk about election fraud because we know that is gonna turn a bunch of the senators away from you, and you might actually lose this. So I almost feel like they were baiting them. Like, yeah, let's. And I don't think the defense attorneys took the bait. They didn't talk about it. They kept it very short and on point. But I don't know. I almost wondered if they were hoping that they would take the bait and want to talk about it. I don't know. That's what I was thinking when I was watching, is like, oh, this is a bait. They want them to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a losing argument. I mean, the vast majority of the American people know that there was no election fraud on such a sweeping and scalable basis that affected the outcome of this election. Were there incidents? There were, and there always are, but not sufficient to overturn the results in sufficient number of states or sufficient number of votes to give the president, former president, the win. So it's a losing argument, and there's only a handful of people who think it's a winning argument, which is why I think the defense attorneys had a very hard time, because they have really an irascible and intractable client. I mean, nobody wants to work for Donald Trump. I mean, that's a fact. It's a very well-known mantra out there in the legal profession. None of the big firms want it. This would be a great time for those types of attorneys who wanted some in on the action, wanted some national exposure, to do it. And to their credit, or rather in their defense, these defense attorneys were only on the case for, several days before the proceedings began, because Trump fired the former counsel, very predictably fired the former counsel because they weren't going to do what he wanted them to do. And you do have ethical obligations as a lawyer to only argue things that are going to be fair and appropriate in the court or in the impeachment trial. And so they were really scrambling a lot, and a lot of their arguments were very political based. And you're absolutely right, Wes. They had no facts they could argue. They had no facts at all. What happened was live happening on TV. I mean, I was home off work that day. I watched the proceedings. I watched what happened. It's seared into the minds of the American people. So they can't argue the facts. What they have to argue, as you pointed out, is that there is no evidence going to the president's state of mind that he intended anyone to take a flagpole or a fire extinguisher or whatever and beat a cop to death. There is no evidence that the president intended when he spoke that thousands of people would storm into the Capitol and take dumps in the hallway and smoke cigars in Nancy Pelosi's office or steal laptops. I mean, he could not have had that kind of intent. I think he was probably surprised that they actually, breached the police line. That's just my own personal thought. I mean, maybe he would have, fantasized about that happening. And his reaction after the fact, I know there were some arguments. Well, the president didn't call people off. He could have called for peace earlier and all those kind of things. But the after the fact evidence of what he did after he realized what was happening doesn't trace back to incitement. It doesn't trace back to his state of mind while he was speaking the words. And if he had intended that to happen, he certainly would have said, go to the Capitol, let your voice be heard, storm the Capitol, find the senators, hang Mike Pence, whatever. And that didn't happen. So the incitement word is a very difficult one to have been proven. But I will say again that the outcome was very predictable. There was just simply no way that 17 Republican senators were going to vote for a conviction. It wasn't going to happen. No way on God's green earth. So what were the House impeachment managers doing? They were, again, taking the opportunity to put this into the minds of the American people, to put this in the minds of people who were watching and tuning in. This actually happened. It happened on Donald Trump's watch, and he's responsible. And Mitch McConnell summed it up, very well. I heard one commentator say in the aftermath of it that, was that Senator McConnell or was that one of the House impeachment managers? Because McConnell laid it right out that Donald Trump is morally and practically responsible for all of the bad events that happened at the Capitol on January 6th. So McConnell hung him out to dry, didn't vote to convict him because he believed he lacked constitutional authority to try someone who was no longer in office. But for all intents and purposes, McConnell was convinced that those actions are the responsibility of Donald Trump.